would be an awesome character. He has captured audience's attention with a single image multiple times.
And if you're gonna put an animal into the game like this and have them fight like Kuma from Tekken or something like that, you've got to make their gameplay fairly different. And I wondered if you had any ideas to like really accentuate like their animalistic qualities and stuff.
You don't have to have him in every game, but like you could bring him back for another one, and just based on who he is, I think that's enough of an argument to give him a roster slot.
He's just a great character. Almost, in my opinion, not a non-negotiable. It's one of the biggest misses in Street Fighter V that he was not on the roster. Certainly, we're not going to talk about anything that's going to get our audience angry today, John.
Oh, guess what? Plot twist. Yeah. We probably will. Now, look, we've been talking a lot about Street Fighter 6 because it's unofficially on the horizon, and it's what people are wanting to talk about, man. People are engaging with our Street Fighter 6, specifically character discussions and who should be there, who shouldn't, stuff along those lines. And so I wanted to continue to carry that baton a little bit further today. I was thinking about it, and this is something that's popped up to me a handful of times over the course of Street Fighter V. There's a lot of...
John, just before you get going, I want to remind our audience to Slipknot the like button, or Psycho Crush it, if they don't mind.
Psycho Crush. Oh, Psychosocial and Psycho... I get it.
I literally, the first time I heard that song, I thought it said Psycho Crusher over and over again, and I'm like, this is the best song.
Now I want to hear that version of the song, yeah.
But anyway, you were saying, John.
Tie a Slipknot around the like button, and... Anyways, yeah, so this week I've been going through Street Fighter V's extensive story, which there is, of course, a Shadow Falls, there are all the character background stories, and then there is also some extra bonus content on the Shadaoo C.R.I. website, and there's a lot more story, I would argue, to this game than I think there has been in a lot of the other entries, maybe more than any of them. And there are a lot of characters that, of course, do not pop up on the character select screen, and when that happens, anytime, especially as we're like contemplating who's going to be the next DLC. That's of course exhausted at this point with the game, but we're like, oh man, they've either made like a playable version of a character in a Shadow Falls, not a playable, but like a working, functioning character that you fight against, or they just pop up in some of the artwork and things along those lines. But there's other characters that have either been around or look super intriguing as a possible playable fighter in the future. And so I've grabbed 5 such characters who are not available to play in Street Fighter V, but I think should get their time in the spotlight now that they've been sitting on the bench for an entire game. Some of which have never been playable before, some of which have been playable before, but I'm going to dig into this. And the first of these is none other than C. Viper. She's probably the easiest one of this group to pick. Viper has been a very popular character. She was introduced in Street Fighter 4, and she's the waifu. She's got some pretty awesome powers, whether it be her electric gloves, her fiery feet, jet propulsion shoes, whatever they are. She's cool. She's a hot, sexy waifu. A lot of people like her for her gameplay, for her appearance, and she's also pretty prominent in Street Fighter V's story. For what that's worth, she's the one that's talking to Rashid throughout, in a very covert way, throughout his story. She runs into Bison. She narrates Bison's story for the most part. She's in Urian's story. She's in Juri's story. She interacts a lot with the characters of SF5 as they play through significant portions of SF5's story, and yet she's not actually available to play. Now, this was much more of a Marvel versus Capcom style fighter as she appeared back in Street Fighter 4, and the likes of Latif and Wolfkrone really made us feel that. She was fun to watch. I did not love playing against C. Viper.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, because I mean that's the biggest thing about Viper is that she's like a KOF. A lot of people called her a KOF character when she was first at King of Fighters. But they kind of adapted that to more Marvel and stuff. And of course, she later showed up in Marvel 3.
She did.
Like, I know you didn't like fighting her. Now, I actually had no problem really with Viper overall in terms of like, I don't think it was a good matchup for Rose, but it was like, her risk reward always felt really good to me because of her super high execution. But you just said you didn't like her. Why did you not like this character?
Viper's, one of her main things was just really ambiguous left-right mix-ups on your wake-up, which would sort of flow into themselves. And that really was a bigger part of the whole vortex nature issue, I should say, of Street Fighter 4. I would hope that they would attend to that sort of a thing if they bring her back in a future game. And no part of me thinks that they wouldn't. They've been focusing in and zeroing in on a lot of the issues that characters have presented because of either their particular issues or just that they are part of a bigger problem, just like overwhelming V triggers or things along those lines. But they've been trying to
Mhm.
get rid of that stuff. They've been trying to get rid of option selects, vortex, overwhelming offense. And so I see this character, she's, like I said, spent some time on the bench, and I think that's good. But a lot of people would be happy to see her come back. And even those of us that had issues with her being so like, well, she had those burn kicks, right? And their left right mix ups. And she just felt like she was moving all over the screen a little faster in the air than the average Street Fighter character would. And so it's like hard to defend against that sort of a thing when, again, she feels like she's coming from another game, and gets like the bonuses and the movements of being in like a Marvel game or something like that. So it's not that she's a Marvel character, but let's make her feel a little bit more like a Street Fighter character while still retaining all of the things that people really like about her. And as I was getting at, even someone like me, who I didn't really like the character, I didn't really like playing against her. I can appreciate that she's cool and all that kind of stuff. I'm ready to have Viper come back in another game. She was very prominent in SF5. Why not bring her back for SF6? I think that would make a lot of people want to buy the game.
Or yeah, I'd love to see her back. One of my favorite characters, actually. It's she's pretty high up there.
Yeah, for sure. So the next one is a character that has, I think, just been invented as of Street Fighter V. When Falk came out and we got her, there was a lot of negativity surrounding her and her all this stuff. But when we got to her story, all of a sudden a whole nother conversation popped up, and it's popped up a few times since. There's just one single image of what's called Neo Shadaloo. Neo Shadaloo
Mhm.
is a four-person or four-figure group that after Bison has been defeated, these four characters that were under Bison's control now are heading out to basically negate some of the effects of Bison, and anyone that's been affected by him, they want to help those people out. There's four characters. Ed's the leader, and of course we know Falk. Then there's one character that has this hat, and we don't know what his name is at all. And then there is a giant gorilla, or yeah, a big gorilla named Baba Malimu, and he is one of these characters. He is imbued with Bison's intelligence and or intellect, and has some kind of a psycho power, whatever that's going to manifest as, I don't know. But Baba Mwalimu would be an awesome character. He has captured audience's attention with a single image multiple times. I remember when G was revealed, people were like, is he connected to the gorilla G and for gorilla and things like that? And like the point
Mhm.
is not that that's a very strong connection. It wasn't, and it didn't manifest to be anything. But like people went to this character when G was revealed, and I think he's come up one other time. The director of Street Fighter V kind of gave us a little bit of extra information on him more recently, and that we did a story on that, and that kind of took off. People were really engaging with that. Point is, this is a character that people are interested in, again, by a single image. And we don't have a ton of characters like a big hulking gorilla. You have your Zangiefs, you have your Blankas and such. And then, you go into other games like the first place that my mind goes, of course, is Injustice 2, where you got Gorilla Grodd, who's like a telekinesis using telekinesis, Kyle. Shout outs to Tenacious D fans. Using Gorilla, who's like more of this sort of like beast from X-Men feel, where it's, you'd think, oh, big, strong, primal beast, but no, he's actually very intelligent and stands upright and sips his tea with his pinky out. And, that contrast has
Mhm.
always been fairly interesting. It's a
Right.
pretty common character
The
throughout.
gentle giant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and well, the
Yeah.
intellectual gentle giant too.
Mhm.
So, and you could do so much with this. Can't you imagine? It's like, does he do rolling attacks like Blanca? Well, maybe he's more of a brawler. Maybe he's like a grappler. Sure, maybe he's not. And there's so much you could do with it. But like a
Yeah,
psycho
actually, that
power
was
gorilla.
yeah, that's where I was gonna go with you. Like, did you have any kind of like stuff envisioned for his moveset? Because to me, I like the character design, but like where a character like this would really shine if you're gonna put an animal into the game like this and have him fight like Kuma from Tekken or something like that, you've got to make their gameplay fairly different. And I wondered if you had any ideas to like really accentuate like their animalistic qualities and stuff and make them like a fighter in that regard. So
I when I went on my honeymoon, I went to Universal Studios in Florida, and they have a whole ride there devoted to Kong from the Peter Jackson Kong movie. And the way that gorilla moves is like it's visceral. It's fun to watch him fight, and he's fighting
yeah,
T Rexes and such. But it's so primal. They could go that direction where maybe. What would be really cool is like again with that whole like sort of beast from X-Men, the intellectual beast animalistic character, is that he's mostly proper in most of his movements, but when he grabs you or whatever, maybe he picks you up above his head like in a press, and then just roars at the camera viciously and breaks your back over his knee and heaves you off, pounds his chest, and then goes straight back to, like, inquisitive doctored gorilla, like something like
Oh,
that would be really
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
And again, you could do whatever you wanted with the character's style. Yeah, maybe you're not going to make him like a zoner, probably not, because just the physicality of him. But I'm not going to say they should just be totally cornered into making him a grappler or making him a brawler. It's like maybe some hybrid, maybe one or the other, sure. But I think there's a lot you could do, and the people have shown that they're interested in this character more so than the other character who we know almost nothing about, the one with the hat in that same image. All we know about him is that his name starts with a G and that he can teleport. So, but we haven't gotten nearly as much of like, oh, speculation about that character with the hat. No, it's all about the gorilla man.
There you go. Yeah, I think with a character like that, it would be very important that their animations and how they're set up and all the moves and stuff like that, just so important to nail, like
Yeah.
to make it feel very satisfying with the character because it's just such a different thing than we're used to, and so like for that to really resonate with people, it's got to have a lot of satisfaction in their move set. That
Mhm.
walk cycle we keep seeing on YouTube. Everyone loves watching fighting game walk
Yes.
cycles for a variety of reasons, but yes,
It's how you can,
there.
yeah, exactly. I hope he has a super sexy walk, but also just that we've only really had visual presentation of him so far, right? But that's such a huge part of fighting games, and the reason why people will or won't love a character. So, yeah, a lot of it would hinge on that. So number three here, this one was probably the hardest of the group that I have here to convince myself that he belonged on the list. But at the end, I was able to, and I feel confident in it. I think this is going to be the one that people disagree with the most, but we'll just see here. And that is the Warrior Prophet from the beginning of Nikali's story. Now, before you click dislike,
Oh.
just hear me out, please. This
I already clicked
character.
dislike, John. It's too late.
All right.
So.
Well, for the rest of you, please. This character kind of narrates Nikali's story, and he sort of sets us up. But he comes from, as far as we can tell, Nikali's time. It looks sort of Aztecian, and he has some pretty badass like armor on, and like a spear made of like elephant tusk, and some knives and things along those. I don't know if it's made of elephant tusk. In fact, that's bad. That's a bad thing. So maybe it's made
Yeah.
of not that, but made from the jungle, from the animals, things like that. And he looks sort of like Tusk from Killer Instinct, so like this warrior, Aztec warrior, clearly lends itself to being a fighting game character right off the bat. I don't think I need to sell anybody on that, but there's not much to him beyond that, at least at surface level. He explains how Nikali goes after a handful of different figures, and I think it's like Ryu and M. Bison and such. And then at the end, Nikali actually comes after him, and that evidences that, well, with wherever time frame he's currently in, that means that Nikali, who like kind of resurrects or pops up every so often and goes after Earth's strongest warriors to consume them, would go after this particular warrior. He's on the level of the likes of Ryu and M. Bison in terms of how good of a fighter he is. So that's intriguing in and of itself. But also, Nikali, man, the character flopped, and you only have to watch about a half of one episode of this podcast, or this show, I should say, to hear about that. But the fact of the matter is, he's got so much potential that just feels unexplored. This character would give us some kind of would give Capcom an opportunity to go back and maybe explore some of the things about Nikali, namely his story and like where he comes from, that we never got to see. And as a former Nikali main, I guess I could call myself, I've always sort of wanted to see that. What is the Mask of Tlali, or what is the sacrificial altar and the significance of it, and what are the ritualistic ceremonies that his moves reference? Things along those lines would be really cool. And this character does not have to play like Nikali. Although I will say, a handful of the character's moves, or Nikali's moves, like his command grab, he grabs you by the face and chucks you at the wall so you bounce off.
Yeah.
And then from there can do this cool version of the DP, or he's got his slash, his Berserker Barrage super. The fact that he upgrades into this like Super Saiyan version, all of those parts are really cool. It's just the sum of those parts didn't add up to being very cool. But
Yeah.
maybe, we can revisit some of those, or at least what made them, and have them encapsulated in this new character that could be a little bit better better executed than Nikali. But I want to turn this over to you and ask, like, what do you think? First of all, do you even remember who I'm talking about? Do you remember
Yeah, I
playing through it?
remember who you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to remember what happens to the narrator in there. Like, do they get eaten or something
He
like
gets
that?
he gets
Or
eaten by
yeah,
Nikali at
okay,
the end, or like
yeah,
assimilated. And so you go, well, he's dead. Well, M Bison gets assimilated, and Ryu gets assimilated, and Dalsum gets assimilated in that story too. So whatever. And yes, he takes place way in the past, but this also sounds like, and I'll let you I'll let you talk. But this also sounds, by the way, like this Aztec like location and time in history is where maybe the Satsui no Haro started, which that
yeah.
would be super intriguing too. They never covered that. It's like another chance to tell us where that came from. But anyway, you were saying.
Well, there's a movie called Apocalypto, which is really violent, really hardcore, and it's got some of the Mayan and I think Aztec culture and other stuff in there, and it's very hardcore. And Street Fighter's more cartoon violence and stuff like that. But when Akali eats someone, he kind of assimilates them into him, and so you could either have a new set of warriors go after Akali for being too violent, too crappy, or whatever, and make that one the protagonist and have him have it kind of an evolved Akali moveset in there or whatever. There's so many ways of approaching this art. Nikali ate someone and Pac-Manned him, and now he's got
After
their
Nikali
powers. And
dies, like all of the warriors are released, but they're released in the
yeah,
present day. There you go.
yeah. Yeah, it's I love the Jekyll and Hyde pitch they originally had for Nikali. It was such a great idea and visually, again, so striking. There's a lot they can and should do, I hope, in this next game. And of course, with Street Fighter 6, I'm highly anticipating some heavy ray tracing in the game. And if that happens, they'll be able to do some really cool stuff with the lighting, especially with some of the characters, where some of the characters just might have these beautiful reflections on them. And it just like, be some of the better looking, fighting game stuff we've ever seen before.
Hmm.
And that would be a character like Nikali, or who's so visually striking like him. They might make a lot of opportunities to make one of the best looking characters we've ever seen. So, if it's not Nikali, I'd love it for it to be like, another Aztec warrior, maybe a noble one or something like that. Since we've got G as a bad guy and Gil as a bad guy now, we don't need Nikali anymore. But like, let's bring in another South American character, or someone from that background, because
Hmm.
it's such a great, culture and other stuff that we could look at. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I think it would be potentially really cool. And like I said, he lends himself so well to a fighting game. He's a warrior. He already knows what he's doing. I think you could do a lot with him. And again, how do you want to build the character? However you want. But
Yeah.
Nikali was a swing and a miss for all intents and purposes. Maybe this is a chance to take one more swing at a lot of the stuff that a lot of his potential. And that brings us to the next character that sort of operates in a similar vein here, in that Fong was a swing and a miss, and but maybe we could get a little something out of his potential because in the not in the game, but like I said earlier, in the Shadaoo C.R.I, there's these three little excerpts, and take you all of 5 to 10 minutes to read them all, that are actually pretty well written, fairly intriguing, and it basically talks about how Fong, post M Bison, is out trying to negotiate over some drinks, which it's funny because he's not affected by alcohol at all because of the way his body, processes poisons and toxins and such. But he's out and he's on his way home in this like kind of seedy area, and he's approached by this prostitute, right? And this prostitute says like, "Hey, do you want to come back for a good time?" Now, Fong is also, as it says in these stories, not intrigued and does not no longer has animalistic inclinations, so to speak, because of the way his body has changed for this toxin stuff. But he follows her anyway, just
John,
because he's intrigued.
you're saying Fong doesn't want to.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I needed to have that spelled out for me. So, thank you. Just making
Yes.
sure.
But so it's like, what is he going for? He goes, he follows her back. She gets undressed, and then her brother pops out, and they're in this like little seedy rundown area. Her brother pops out and tries to basically blackmail Fong by taking some pictures
Okay.
of him and saying, "Oh, we're gonna unless you give us some money." So Fong takes out two items from under his coat: a stack of money and a dagger with some Chinese markings on it. And he throws them both down. He says, "Pick one." Now it also tells us, unbeknownst to the characters that are about to pick, that the Fongs poisoned this stack of money. So if they touch it, they will slowly die over a course of a few days, which means they'll also kill the people that they're interacting with after this. Or if they grab the dagger, he's going to cut their hand off. Whomever grabs the dagger will cut their hand off, because it's a sacred sort of like talisman from his assassin group, and that will just simply cause the legend of the dagger to grow, because someone will have interacted with it, got their hand cut off, and then tell all their friends, "Yeah, there was this dagger, and it's got these weird Chinese symbols on it, and I got my hand cut off as a result." Well, the guy has terrible character, and he's just kind of telling his sister to get the money, but he's afraid and a loser. She reaches for the dagger, but she doesn't touch it. And then she looks up at Fong and she goes, I don't know what these mean because I'm not educated. And he says, they're ancient techniques for making poison. And she shows, she's fearful, but she shows this something or other in her eyes, this spirit of confidence or something that Fong, it strikes Fong, and he snatches up the money and the dagger, and he leaves the teenage boy alone, and he says to the girl, follow me, you will become Phantom, my new apprentice. And she does, and that's where things end. Point is, Fong has an apprentice that he is training up. What do you want to do with this character, man? She doesn't have to have the same Fong mechanic, the damage over time thing, but she's got this awesome dagger, and she's an otherwise blank slate, and again, potential to take what was a cool idea in Fong and maybe take another swing at it. Now, how does this strike you though? Are you going
No, I
like,
love
nah,
it.
it's too far of a reach, or
I wish this was in the game. It's like you're describing the story, and I'm like, why isn't this portrayed in the game? Like this would have been
yes?
perfect for Fong's story mode. And but I digress. Yeah, this sounds terrific, and I kind of feel like when you have a swing and a miss with a character, it's best off to kind of move on to a character who maybe encapsulates that style in a different way. Right, like it's like, oh, it didn't work, and so Fong's apprentice sounds perfect to me.
Hmm.
And maybe she's more rushed down instead of zoning and
She
stuff, and
could be
maybe that makes
like,
a
yeah, exactly. I was thinking like maybe like a jury type moving character, she's not
Mhm,
trying to zone or things like that. And maybe she does have DOT. And maybe she's
mhm.
got, well, she's definitely got that dagger, right? And maybe that dagger puts poison on people. Maybe she only accesses it at certain times, or maybe she can lose it like Cody's dagger. Maybe it only affects other people's meter or stun as opposed to their life bar. Who knows? But the point is, I read this story and I got goosebumps a couple of times. So it's like, dude, you guys have set up this awesome character. Let's explore more. And again, another
Mhm.
shot at Fong.
Yep.
That brings me to my final character of this list. It is the character that when you boot up Street Fighter V for the first time and you are forced into this tutorial mode, it's the first one you see and hear. It's Goken. Goken
Mm.
sat on the bench for Street Fighter V, fair enough. But man, this is Ryu and Ken's master. And given who Ryu and Ken are in Street Fighter, it's like that's a big deal in and of itself. He's also Akuma's brother and Akuma's main competition. It's like that's pretty cool too, guys. It's like, okay, you don't have to have him in every game, but like you could bring him back for another one. And just based on who he is, I think that's enough to of an argument to give him a roster slot. But what do you think about that?
One of my favorite characters in the entire franchise.
Me too.
Gouken Shenlong is the stuff of legends, kind of thing. Even before you and I were friends, like I still loved Gouken, kind of thing. It's like he's just a great character. Almost, in my opinion, not a non-negotiable. It's one of the biggest misses in Street Fighter V that he was not on the roster.
Hmm.
Maybe they couldn't quite figure out what to do with him. Fireball characters really did struggle a lot in that game. There's a lot of reasons I think why Gouken didn't make it, but I don't know if there's a valid excuse why he didn't make it, because he just should be in pretty much every fighting game, because it's like even if he dies he's still coming back, right? So he can only die, so it's like you can't kill this guy, so
He's
just keep
got some
bringing him
pretty
back.
strong
And
plot
yeah,
armor.
yeah,
So,
so I mean it's a yeah it's Gouken should be there. He should be a non-negotiable if you ask me.
well, what I would argue in terms of why he wouldn't show up in SF5 or why they chose not to is because, okay, so I played a lot of Gouken and I played on Wednesday Night Fights. So people would talk to me about the character and they would often share their appreciations for the character and maybe why they didn't play him. And what I heard so many times was that like I started playing this character, but he did not click for me. There was something
Mhm.
he had some kind of a barrier that most players when they picked him up just it didn't click long enough to encourage them to stay with him. Something like that. But then when they saw him played at a high level, they're like he's so cool, the things that he does, and I don't know what was particularly cool about him. Like I have my own opinions. I thought it was really fun to throw high fireballs, and then when you catch someone, follow it up to show that you were ready for it, either with an ultra 2
Mhm.
or a rush punch, things like that. His counters were so sick. Counter into super was one of the most satisfying and entertaining things to do. Hot damn,
That
yeah.
was gonna be your firstborn's name, his counter into super, 'cause that's what you told us, like,
The
when you first,
Velociraptor
got rid of it.
special.
Yeah, you're like, "I have to name my firstborn, count her into super, and I'm like, what if it's a girl? It's like same thing, count her into super. She's getting that name. So
Wow, I said that. I'm glad that I didn't have a
yeah,
kid close to that time in my life.
we would have held you to it. So
Well, I've take backsies. And, I'm just gonna name my kid Goken. So yeah, I just he's a great character, and again, maybe some of the things that didn't work with him in SF4, that feeling of barrier to entry that people might have felt, they could fix that, and how they
yeah.
rework him for whenever he comes back. But man, ain't nobody's gonna be like, oh, Goken, well that was a wasted spot. Would you guys? Tell us in the comments if you would say that if you're a heartless, soulless monster. But I think most people would appreciate Goken.
Yeah, they got to bring him back.
Yeah, bring him back. So now, really quickly, there are a bunch of other characters that could have been on this list. These were my choices. That doesn't mean they're the choices. So I'd be really happy to hear what you guys think. Some of the other ones that, there's like Azam, who is Rashid's kind of butler and handler kind of character, and he's often brought up. There's Byron Taylor, which I think we're all pretty fingers crossed that he doesn't show up. Abel is prominent through Street Fighter V story, but like as we talked about in a recent video, probably not one of at least your first picks, and wasn't one of my first picks either here. There is, and there's more than that, but there's one honorable mention that I will give here, and that is Sean. I personally am not a huge Sean, like I don't dislike him, but I'm like, oh man, win Sean. He's, like you've said before, widely a joke character, even if that's not how he was originally intended. But it does seem like a lot of people, having seen him and sort of been teased in a sense by his presence in SF5 story. He's, of course, the brother of Laura, and was a playable character in Street Fighter 3. A lot of people are like, let's bring Sean back. So, like you said, I'd be okay with Sean, but maybe as a DLC a few seasons in or something, but not so much as a launch roster character. And I'm sorry, Sean fans, that's just how I feel. And you can tell me how you feel in the comments. It's all good. I'll still kick it with you if you want. But there it is. Those are my 5 characters that were in SF5 story at some capacity who should get their shot in SF6.